The city was a beast of concrete and noise, and for the boy, it was both a prison and a home. He had been living within its gritty heart for nearly 2 years, though he'd lost exact count. His world was made of shadowy corners, alleyways that smelled of old rain and garbage, and the constant gnawing feeling in his stomach. He was 16, but his eyes looked much older. Tonight, the beast was cold. A sharp wind snaked through the streets, carrying the promise of winter. It found him huddled in a doorway, his thin jacket doing little to stop its bite. He pulled his knees closer to his chest, trying to make himself smaller, invisible. People hurried past, their faces hidden behind scarves, their lives a mystery. No one glanced his way. He was just another piece of the urban scenery, a stain on the pavement. He knew he couldn't stay in the doorway. The night watchman for the nearby building would soon do his rounds and shoo him away with gruff words. He needed somewhere the wind couldn't reach, a place with walls. Pushing himself up, his joints stiff and aching, he started to walk. His feet, in worn-out shoes that let in the damp, carried him to a part of the city everyone else seemed to forget, the old industrial district. Here, the factories were silent skeletons. Windows were boarded up or gaped open like empty eye sockets. Weeds pushed their way through cracks in the pavement, reclaiming the land. It was a place of ghosts and echoes, and that suited him just fine. He was a ghost, too. He moved with a quiet purpose, knowing the police rarely patrolled these deserted streets. His eyes scanned the familiar buildings until they landed on one he had noticed a few days before, but hadn't yet explored. It was a low, long warehouse, its red brick faded to a dull rust color. One of the large rolling doors was bent and broken, leaving a gap just wide enough for someone his size to slip through. He squeezed through the opening, the rust staining his already dirty sleeve. The inside was a cathedral of decay. The air was thick and still, heavy with the smell of dust, old oil, and damp wood. Pale moonlight filtered through holes in the corrugated iron roof, painting silver stripes on the floor littered with forgotten things, a broken chair, a stack of rotting cardboard, and scattered metal parts whose purpose was long lost. He was about to settle in a relatively clean corner when a shape in the far end of the warehouse caught his eye. It was large and bulky, covered by a thick, grimy cloth that was coated in a layer of gray dust. Something about its form was different from the other junk. It wasn't angular or mechanical. It had curves. His curiosity, a feeling he rarely entertained these days, prickled at him. He walked closer, his footsteps echoing softly in the vast space. Reaching out a hesitant hand, he grabbed a corner of the cloth. It was heavy. He pulled, and a cloud of dust billowed up, making him cough and wave a hand in front of his face. As the dust settled, he saw it. His breath caught in his throat. It was a piano. A grand piano. It was in a terrible state. One of its large, elegant legs was completely broken, causing the whole instrument to tilt sadly to one side, its body propped up by a stack of crumbling bricks. The beautiful dark wood was scarred with deep scratches, and a long crack ran along its lid. The surface was cloudy and dull. He stood there, frozen, staring. A piano. Here, in this place of ruin. It felt like finding a diamond in a landfill. It was so out of place, so impossibly wrong, that it felt like a miracle. Slowly, almost afraid it might disappear, he approached it. He ran his fingers along the wood, feeling the rough scratches under his fingertips. He looked at the keys. They were once a perfect pattern of black and white, but now they were yellowed like old teeth. Some had chips missing. They were filthy. A memory, sharp and sudden, flashed in his mind. A warm, sunlit room, the smell of polish, a woman's gentle, hands guiding his small fingers on a keyboard, showing him where to place them for a C major chord. His grandmother. She used to call his playing sunshine for her ears. The memory was so vivid and so painful that he physically flinched, pulling his hand back from the piano as if the keys had burned him, that life was gone, shattered. The warmth, the safety, the music. All of it was buried under the rubble of what came after. He had locked that part of himself away, throwing away the key. This piano was a ghost from that past, and he wanted to turn and run. But he didn't. Instead, after a long moment, he reached out again. His hand, grimy from life on the streets, hovered over the keys. He took a deep, shaky breath. He was afraid. Afraid that pressing a key would break the spell, that the sound would be ugly, that it would confirm that the beauty of his past was truly dead and gone. He chose a key in the middle, a white one. He pressed it down. The note that came out was awful. It was flat and tinny, a dull thwunk that hung in the dusty air. It wasn't the clear, ringing tone from his memory. It was the sound of abandonment, of brokenness. But it was a sound, and it was music. He pressed another key, and then another, creating a discordant, jangling chord. A strange feeling began to stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't quite happiness. It was more like purpose. This broken, abandoned thing in this forgotten place felt just like him. It was thrown away, left to rot, its beauty unseen and its voice unheard. In that moment, he didn't see a ruined instrument. He saw a companion. He looked around the dark, empty warehouse. The wind moaned softly outside, but in here, he felt a strange sense of calm. He had found more than just shelter from the cold. He had found a secret. He had found a reason to come back. He carefully sat down on the dusty floor, leaning his back against the bricks that held the piano up. He was no longer just a boy hiding from the cold. He was the keeper of a forgotten treasure. And as he sat there in the quiet dark, he knew with a certainty that warmed him from the inside that he would return tomorrow. The cold light of morning found the boy still curled up against the piano's brick support. He hadn't meant to sleep the whole night there, but for the first time in months, his sleep had been deep, untroubled by the usual fears of being discovered or chased away. He woke not with a jolt, but slowly, his eyes opening to the sight of dust motes dancing in the sunbeams cutting through the roof. For a single peaceful moment, he forgot where he was. Then he saw the piano looming over him, and the memory of the previous night washed over him. His first thought, as always, was of his stomach. It growled, a sharp reminder of his reality. He needed to move to find something to eat. The city's daily rhythm was starting outside, and he knew the best places to check for discarded food were early in the day. But as he stood up, his body stiff from the hard floor, he found he didn't want to leave. He looked at the piano. It felt wrong to just walk away from it. He spent the morning on his usual routines, his mind only half on the task. He found a half-eaten sandwich in a bin behind a bakery, its bread still soft. He filled his old water bottle from a public tap. It was enough to quiet the hunger for a while, but a new kind of hunger was growing inside him, one that food couldn't satisfy. All he could think about was getting back to that warehouse, back to the piano. By the afternoon, he was slipping back through the broken door, his heart beating a little faster. The warehouse felt different now. It wasn't just a hiding place anymore. It was his place. He walked over to the piano and just stood there looking at it. In the daylight, its condition was even more clear. The dust was thick, the wood was dry and cracked, and the keys were a sad, stained yellow. A thought came to him. He couldn't fix its broken leg or its cracked soundboard, but he could clean it. It felt like the right thing to do, a way to show it respect. He took the ragged cloth he sometimes used as a scarf and went back outside to a puddle of leftover rainwater. He soaked the cloth and wrung it out, then returned to his task. He started gently, wiping the dust from the lid. The grime came off in dark, ugly smears. He worked slowly, carefully, moving to the sides and the front of the piano. He didn't have any polish, so he just used water and the fabric, rubbing until the wood began to show a faint hint of its original color beneath the dirt. It was hard work and his arms grew tired, but he didn't stop. He cleaned around the keys, being careful not to let any water drip down inside. He was giving this broken thing a little bit of its dignity back, and in a strange way, it made him feel better about himself, too. When he was finished, the piano wasn't shiny or new. It was still a wreck, but it was his wreck. It was clean. He sat back down on the floor, looking at his work with a small sense of pride. Now the keys seemed to call to him. Yesterday he had only pressed a few, scared of the sound. Today the fear was still there, but it was smaller. He remembered what his grandmother had taught him, a lifetime ago. "First you must make friends with the notes," she would say. "You learn their names, where they live. You don't just bang on them." He lifted his hands. His fingers were dirty, his nails chipped. They didn't look like a pianist's hands. They looked like the hands of someone who slept on the streets. He pushed the thought away. He found middle C just as she had shown him. He pressed it. The same flat, dull sound echoed in the empty space. But this time he was ready for it. He didn't pull his hand away. He pressed it again, listening not for the beauty that wasn't there, but for the character of the sound itself. He moved to the D, then the E, playing a simple C major scale. Every note was out of tune, some more than others. A few keys made a faint buzzing sound when pressed. It should have been discouraging. But to the boy, it was like a puzzle. He started to play the simple exercises from his childhood. The first one his grandmother ever taught him, "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," came out jangled and strange, the wrong notes sticking out like sore thumbs. But something amazing happened. His fingers, stiff and clumsy at first, began to remember. The muscle memory, buried deep for years, started to wake up. He played for what felt like only a few minutes, but when he looked up, the light in the warehouse had changed. The sun was lower in the sky. He had been playing for hours. His back ached and his fingers were sore, but a feeling was blooming in his chest, a feeling so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. It was joy, a pure, simple joy. He stopped, letting the silence settle back in. The warehouse seemed even quieter now, as if it had been listening. He looked at his hands, then back at the piano. This wasn't just a broken object anymore. It was an instrument, and he could still play it. He knew right then that this was his secret. This was his world. No one knew about this place. No one knew he could do this. In a life where he had nothing, where he was nobody, this was something that belonged only to him. It was a tiny, flickering light in the overwhelming darkness. He stood up, his body tired, but his spirit feeling lighter than it had in years. He had to go back out into the cold evening, back to the struggle of finding a safe place to sleep. But as he slipped out of the warehouse, he knew he would be back tomorrow. He had a reason to get through the day. He had music to return to. The days began to find a new rhythm, a rhythm built around the piano. The boy's life, which had been a blur of hungry days and fearful nights, now had a center. The warehouse was his true north. Everything else, the search for food, the search for shelter, was just what he had to do to get back there. He started to think of the piano not as a broken thing, but as a friend who was sick. Its voice was hoarse and out of tune, but it still had a voice. His job was to learn how to listen to it. He began his visits the same way every time. He would slip inside, his eyes needing a moment to adjust to the dim light. He would place his small bag of belongings, an extra shirt, his water bottle, carefully in the corner. Then he would walk to the piano and lay a hand on its wood, a quiet hello. The cleaning became a ritual. He found a slightly less ragged piece of cloth and kept it hidden near the door. He would use a few precious drops from his water bottle to dampen it, wiping away the new dust that settled each day. He couldn't fix the deep scratches or the broken leg, but he could keep its surface clean. It was a way of showing he cared. Then, the playing would begin. At first, it was just the simple songs from his childhood. His fingers, which had grown used to being cold and clenched, were slowly remembering how to be graceful. They were becoming stronger, more sure of themselves. The stiffness was melting away, replaced by a new flexibility. He worked through the scales and the finger exercises his grandmother had drilled into him, the boring stuff that built the foundation. He played them over and over on the jangling keys until the wrong notes started to feel predictable, almost right. One afternoon, he decided to be brave. He closed his eyes and tried to remember a piece his grandmother loved. It was by Beethoven, the Moonlight Sonata. He remembered the first few notes were slow and deep, like drops of water falling into a still pond. He placed his fingers on the keys and tried. It was a disaster. The notes were all wrong. The beautiful, haunting melody was twisted into something sad and ugly by the out-of-tune strings. A feeling of hot frustration rose in his chest. He wanted to slam the lid shut and never open it again. It felt like trying to have a conversation with someone who spoke a different language. He pulled his hands back into his lap, clenching them into fists. He almost got up to leave, but then he took a deep breath. He looked at the piano, tilting on its broken leg. It wasn't trying to be difficult. It was doing the best it could with what it had. He understood that feeling better than anyone. So, he didn't give up. He started again. This time he didn't fight the piano. He listened to it. He played the first note of the sonata and let its flat, dull sound hang in the air. He waited for its echo to fade before he played the next. He started to adjust his playing to match the instrument's strange voice. He played slower. He pressed the keys with more feeling, trying to pull as much sound out of them as possible. He found that if he played very softly on the worst notes, they didn't sound quite as bad. Slowly, something began to change. The music wasn't the perfect, clean sound from a concert hall. It was something else. It was raw and full of emotion. The sadness of the notes matched the sadness of the piano's condition. The hope in the melody mirrored the small flicker of hope he was starting to feel in his own heart. He wasn't just playing the notes on the page anymore. He was pouring everything he felt, the loneliness, the fear, the memory of warmth, and this new, strange joy into the music. He lost all track of time. The sun moved across the floor, and he didn't notice. His hunger faded into the background. The only thing that existed was the music coming from his fingertips and the old, broken piano. He was no longer a homeless boy and a discarded object. They were partners. They were creating something beautiful out of their brokenness. When he finally stopped, his fingers were tired and the warehouse was filled with the deep blue light of evening. He felt a deep sense of peace, a feeling he had almost forgotten was possible. It was like all the noise inside his head had been quieted. He knew he had to go out into the cold night. He knew he had to find a safe place to sleep. But as he gathered his things, he felt different. He didn't feel as heavy. The world outside the warehouse didn't feel as scary. He had a secret. He had a place where he could be someone else, even if it was just for a few hours a day. He was the boy who could make the ruins sing, and that was enough to keep him going. The world outside the warehouse was changing. The air grew colder and the nights longer. The boy's thin jacket was no match for the biting wind that now swept through the city streets. Life became a harder, more desperate struggle. Finding food was more difficult. Finding a safe, warm place to sleep felt almost impossible. Some nights he would huddle in a subway station, only to be moved along by security. Other nights he would curl up in a doorway, shivering until the first light of dawn. But through it all, the warehouse was his constant. It was his anchor. No matter how bad the day had been, no matter how cold or hungry he was, he knew he could always go back there. The piano was waiting. He had started to think of the music as his own private language. It was a way to talk about things he had no words for. When he felt the deep ache of loneliness, he would play the slow, sad parts of the Moonlight Sonata, and the piano's mournful sound understood him perfectly. When he remembered a happy moment from his past, a flash of his grandmother's smile or the warmth of a real bed, he would play something lighter and faster, and the jangling notes seemed to dance with him. He was no longer just remembering old pieces. He had started to make up his own. Little melodies would come into his head while he was walking the streets. A pattern of raindrops on a windowsill, the rhythm of a train on the tracks, the sad call of a distant siren, all these city sounds started to turn into music in his mind. He would hurry back to the warehouse, afraid he would forget the tune, and would sit down and try to find the notes on the keyboard. His own music was even easier to play on the out-of-tune piano because it was born from this same broken world. He was careful, always so careful. He never played when there was a chance someone could hear. He made sure the street was completely empty before he slipped inside. He only played during the day, when the noise of the distant traffic could help cover the sound. He felt like a guardian of a precious, fragile secret. If anyone found out, it would all be over. They would take his place away. They would take the piano away. The thought was a constant, low-level fear in the back of his mind. Meanwhile, a young woman was walking down a street near the industrial district. She was a student at the university, studying music. She had a heavy bag of books on her shoulder and was lost in her own thoughts, worrying about an upcoming exam. She was taking a shortcut she didn't usually take, frustrated that the main road was blocked by construction. As she walked past the old silent warehouses, a sound stopped her dead in her tracks. It was music. It was faint and it was wrong. The notes were out of tune, distorted, but it was also beautiful. It was a piece by Debussy, Clair de Lune, but it was like hearing it in a dream. It was being played with so much feeling, with such a deep, aching sadness, that it caught in her chest. She stood still, listening. Where was it coming from? She followed the sound, her footsteps quiet on the cracked pavement. It led her to a particularly dilapidated warehouse with a broken door. The music was clearer here, flowing out from the dark opening. It was real. Her musician's ear was horrified by the terrible tuning of the instrument, but her heart was captivated by the soul of the player. She moved closer, peering carefully through the broken slat in the door. Her eyes took a moment to adjust to the darkness inside. And then she saw him, a boy. He was so thin. His clothes were dirty and hung loosely on his frame. He was sitting on the bare, dusty floor, his body leaning towards the piano, his head bowed in concentration. His fingers, though caked with grime, moved over the yellowed keys with a grace and certainty that took her breath away. She watched, frozen, as he finished the piece. The last note faded into the dusty air, and he let his hands fall into his lap. He sat there for a moment in complete silence, as if saying a quiet goodbye to the music. The young woman's mind was racing. Who was he? How did he get here? How could someone living in such conditions play with that level of emotion? It was the most pure, honest performance she had ever heard. Without really thinking, her hand moved. She pulled her phone from her pocket. Her fingers were shaking. She felt like she was intruding on something sacred, but she also knew that no one would ever believe her if she just told them. They had to see it. She held her phone up to the crack in the door and pressed record. She only captured about 30 seconds. Just enough to see the boy, the ruined warehouse, the broken piano, and to hear that haunting, imperfect music. She stopped the recording and quickly stepped away, her heart pounding in her ears. She felt a mix of guilt and a strange sense of urgency. She hurried away from the warehouse, the image of the boy burned into her mind. That evening, sitting in her warm, safe dorm room, she looked at the video. It was shaky and dark, but it captured the impossible magic of what she had witnessed. She knew she had to do something, but what? She didn't want to get him in trouble. She didn't want to scare him away. Finally, she decided to post it online. Not to make it viral, but to ask for help. Maybe someone would know who he was. Maybe someone could help him. She wrote a simple message and posted the video. Found this angel in the ruins. Who is he? How can we help him? She posted it, said a little prayer, and went to bed, hoping that somehow this small act would make a difference. She had no idea that the quiet secret the boy had been guarding so carefully was now, with the click of a button, about to be broken wide open. The day after the video was posted started like any other for the boy. He woke up cold, found a piece of fruit from a market stall that was going bad, and made his way to the warehouse. He felt a little lighter than usual. A new melody had been forming in his head, a tune that felt both sad and hopeful, and he was eager to try it out on the piano. He slipped inside his sanctuary, the familiar smell of dust and old wood welcoming him. He went through his usual ritual, placing his bag down, gently wiping the dust from the piano's lid. He sat down, took a deep breath, and let his fingers find the first notes of his new song. The music filled the space just for him. He was completely lost in his own world, unaware that outside, that world was being turned upside down. The young woman who had taken the video woke up and checked her phone. She expected to see a few likes, maybe a comment or two from her friends. Her screen was flooded. Notifications poured in like a waterfall. Her phone was buzzing constantly. The video had not been seen by dozens of people. It had been seen by thousands. Then tens of thousands. People had shared it everywhere. News websites had picked it up, writing headlines like, "Homeless prodigy discovered in abandoned warehouse." and the secret pianist of the city. The comments section was a mix of shock, awe, and overwhelming concern. Who is this kid? His playing is full of soul. This breaks my heart. We have to find him. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And the saddest. Someone please help him. The video was a shock to the system because it showed two impossible things together: terrible hardship and incredible beauty. People couldn't look away. The young woman felt a wave of panic. This was so much bigger than she had ever imagined. She started to get messages from reporters, from television shows, from music schools. Everyone wanted to know the location. Everyone wanted to find the piano boy. She refused to give it. She was terrified that a crowd of strangers with cameras would descend on him and scare him away forever. Her goal had been to help, not to create a circus. Meanwhile, the news of the video reached a different kind of person. A woman who had been a social worker for many years saw the story on the local news. While everyone else was talking about the music, she was looking at the boy's face. She saw the hollows in his cheeks, the tiredness in his eyes, the way his clothes hung off his thin frame. She wasn't thinking about a viral sensation. She was thinking about a child who needed food, a warm bed, and someone to care for him. She had worked with many young people living on the streets. She knew they were often scared and distrustful of adults. If a group of reporters rushed him, he would run, and he would disappear deeper into the shadows. He would be lost again. She decided to find him her own way. She didn't need the exact address from the video. The background gave enough clues: the type of brick, the style of the windows. She knew the industrial district well from her work. She spent the afternoon driving slowly through those quiet, empty streets, her eyes scanning the buildings. Back in the warehouse, the boy finished playing. The silence that followed felt deeper than before. He felt good. The new melody was taking shape. He stood up, stretched, and decided to go out and look for some water. As he stepped out through the broken door, blinking in the afternoon sun, he saw a car parked a little way down the street. It wasn't a police car or a news van. It was an ordinary, slightly old car. A woman was standing beside it. She wasn't holding a camera. She wasn't rushing towards him. She was just standing there watching him. His first instinct was to run. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to get away. But something about her was different. She wasn't looking at him with curiosity or pity. She looked calm. She looked kind. He froze, one foot still in the warehouse, ready to flee. The woman took a slow step forward, but kept her distance. She raised her empty hands, a gentle gesture to show she meant no harm. "Hello," she said, her voice soft and steady. "I'm not here to cause any trouble. I saw a video. Someone filmed you playing the piano." The boy's heart dropped into his stomach. His secret was out. The walls of his safe place were crumbling. He took a step back into the darkness of the warehouse. The woman didn't follow him inside. She stayed at the doorway. "The way you play," she continued, "it's very beautiful." It touched a lot of people. "They're worried about you." He didn't speak. He just stared at her from the shadows, his body tense. "My job," she said, "is to help young people. I want to make sure you're safe. I want to make sure you have food to eat and a warm place to sleep. That's all. No cameras, no interviews. Just help if you'll let me." She didn't push. She didn't try to come closer. She just stood there, giving him space, letting him process her words. She was offering help, but not forcing it. She was treating him like a person, not a story. The boy looked at her, then back into the warehouse at the silhouette of his piano. He thought about the coming winter, the relentless cold, the constant hunger. He thought about the fear that never really went away. He had been holding on to his independence so tightly. But what did it really mean? It meant being alone. This woman was offering a different way. It was scary. It was unknown. But for the first time, someone had found him and wasn't trying to take something away. She was trying to give him something. He didn't know what to do. He stood there, caught between the safety of his lonely world and the frightening possibility of a new one. The boy stood frozen in the doorway of the warehouse, the social worker's words hanging in the cold air between them. His heart was a wild drum against his ribs. Every instinct, every lesson learned from 2 years of survival on the streets told him to run, to melt back into the shadows and never return to this place that was now discovered. He looked at the woman. Her hands were still open, her posture calm. She wasn't advancing. She was just waiting. He glanced back into the darkness, at the familiar shape of the piano. It had been his only friend, his voice. The thought of leaving it behind felt like tearing a piece of his own soul out. But the thought of another winter in the cold, of the endless, gnawing hunger, felt even worse. Slowly, so slowly, he took a small step forward, out of the warehouse and into the dim light of the street. It was the hardest step he had ever taken. The woman gave him a small, gentle smile. "My name is Anna," she said. "Would it be okay if I bought you something to eat? We can just talk. No one else has to know we met today." He was still wary, but the word eat was a powerful lure. He gave a single short nod. They didn't go far. She took him to a small, quiet cafe where the booths were high and offered privacy. She bought him a hot sandwich and a mug of rich hot chocolate. He ate slowly at first, then with a hunger he couldn't hide. She didn't bombard him with questions. She just let him eat in silence, giving him the dignity of that simple act. When he was finished, he felt a warmth inside him that wasn't just from the food. It was a feeling of being cared for, even in this small way. She began to talk, not about foster homes or systems, but about practical things. She told him about a safe place he could stay for a few nights, a shelter that was clean and where he wouldn't be bothered. She said there were people who wanted to help because they had been moved by his music. She talked about the possibility of a school for young musicians, a place where he could play pianos that were in tune, where he could learn properly. It all sounded like a dream, too good to be true. But the food in his stomach was real. Her calm, patient presence was real. Over the next few days, he met with Anna several times. She never broke her promise. There were no cameras, no reporters. She helped him get a warm coat, new socks, and sturdy shoes. She arranged for him to stay at the shelter she had mentioned. For the first night in years, he slept in a real bed, under a clean blanket, and the deep, fear-filled part of his mind could finally rest. He was safe. Meanwhile, Anna was working behind the scenes. The video had also been seen by a very old, respected music teacher. He was a man known for being strict and hard to impress. He had taught many brilliant students, but he had grown tired of showy talent without heart. When a fellow teacher sent him the video, he almost dismissed it. Then he listened. He listened past the out-of-tune piano. He listened to the emotion, the phrasing, the raw feeling the boy poured into every note. This wasn't just technique. This was a story. This was a soul speaking through music. The old teacher, who had seen everything, was deeply moved. He contacted the news station that had covered the story, and they put him in touch with Anna. A meeting was arranged. The boy was nervous. He was now clean, wearing his new clothes, but he felt like he was about to be tested in a way he never had before. Anna drove him to a simple, quiet music studio. The old teacher was there. He had a stern face, but his eyes were sharp and kind. He didn't say much at first. He just pointed to a beautiful, grand piano in the center of the room. It was everything the warehouse piano was not: polished, perfect, and in tune. "Play for me," the old teacher said, his voice low and gravelly. "Play anything you like." The boy's hands were shaking. He sat on the plush bench, his feet firmly on the floor. He looked at the perfect white keys. For a moment, he was afraid. This piano was a stranger. Then he closed his eyes. He thought of the warehouse. He thought of the cold, the loneliness, and the joy of discovery. He thought of his grandmother. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play the piece he had composed in the ruins. The sound that filled the room was breathtaking. The notes were pure and clear, each one ringing like a bell. The melody, born from hardship, soared through the studio, more powerful and beautiful than he could have ever imagined. He poured his entire story into the music, the pain, the hope, the loss, and the fragile new beginning. When he finished, the silence in the room was heavy. He opened his eyes, afraid to look at the old teacher. The man was wiping a tear from his eye. He walked over to the piano and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was not just playing. That was truth. You have a rare gift, young man. Don't ever let the world take it from you." He offered the boy a full scholarship to a prestigious arts academy. It wasn't just a school. It was a home for young artists. He would have a room, his meals, and most importantly, he would have access to teachers and pianos every day. The donations that had poured in from the online video were placed in a trust fund, managed by Anna and a lawyer, to be used for his future, ensuring he would never have to worry about money for his education. The boy's life changed in a way he could never have dreamed of. He moved into the academy. He had his own small, warm room. He made friends with other students who loved music as much as he did. He practiced for hours on magnificent pianos, his skills growing under the guidance of the old teacher who became his mentor. He never forgot the warehouse piano. One weekend he went back with Anna. It was still there, silent and tilting. He sat down on the dusty floor one last time and played a quiet, thankful goodbye. It had been his first friend when he had none. It had saved him. He wasn't the homeless boy anymore. He was a student. He was a musician. He had a future. His story had begun in silence and darkness, but it had found its melody, and now that melody was just beginning.